Welcome to episode 2 of the Don't Worry, Nobody's Listening podcast. My name is Jason Benicki Critchlow, and once again, I'll be your host. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Share it with your friends, families, neighbors, co-workers, everybody. Let's see how many people we can get to listen to the Nobody's Listening podcast and see what we can do with it. We're on iTunes, CastBox, Peapod app. I put it on my Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. I feel like that's enough. If there's a need for any more, then hit me up on my Twitter or Instagram or YouTube channel at JASONBANICKI and let me know and I can get it out there if you have some friends who can't find it somewhere. But I think that covers most everybody. And then once we hit the 5-episode mark, I'll work on getting it on TuneIn Radio and Spotify. You have to have a little bit of a library built up before they'll put you on, just because they don't want to throw somebody on after 1 or 2 episodes and then, oops, they never do it again, and now they've wasted a whole feed spot for that. And so we'll work on that. If you tuned in for the first episode, and judging by my download numbers, none of you did, I talked about the first season of the OC. Gave you a little recap, my opinion on some things, why I thought it was kind of groundbreaking and changed the teeny drama genre at that time, and how hard in the paint that went. But as I said also in that first episode, this podcast is going to be for me to talk about whatever I want, whether that's pop culture, media, news, sports, politics, whatever it's going to be that I feel like talking about that given Monday night. I'll pop the Zoom recorder on, hook up the microphone, and start talking. This week, I'm going to pick 3 things, all sports related, to talk about in no particular order. I'm going to talk about the Chicago Bulls rebuild and my movement to fire Garpax, hashtag fire Garpax. Can't let them have another offseason. They're a disaster, and I'll elaborate on that more. Then I also want to talk about the lack of movement in baseball free agency and the C word, and we'll get to that. Let your minds wonder on what that C word might be. And then, of course, this is the Monday after the Super Bowl, so I feel obligated to talk about the Eagles beating the Patriots last night, what I was feeling while I was watching that game, and of course what this means in the grand scheme of Brady and Belichick's legacy in terms of the Super Bowl. So I think those are going to be the 3 things I talk about. I should be able to get those all in without taking too terribly much time. If I start to go really long on one, then I'll go ahead and cut short after maybe 2 topics, or cut one short. But I don't think this will take me much more than an hour. Again, this being a one-man podcast, it's not like I have to have any friendly banter. It's just my stream of consciousness into the microphone. And to make this clear, I do very little prep for this. I do almost no research and almost zero fact checking. That's kind of my style. I just want this to be something I pick up, do. Takes about an hour to record, another couple hours to edit and post, and then it's all set, and it's been a good day. So with that, I think I'm going to start with Super Bowl 52 last night. In terms of a football game, what more could you ask for? It was exciting. It was high scoring. I mean, there are some of us who would have loved to see a little more defense and field position and things like that come into play. But all in all, it was an entertaining game to watch. 41-33. 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. You have the absolute worst announcer in all of professional football, and Chris Collinsworth just sitting up there in the booth, just like sucking Tom Brady's D super hard. One of the things I'm going to try and work on is swearing less in these podcasts. I have this tendency to use a lot of profanity, so I'm going to try and edit myself at least some. Still going to be kind of not safe for work, obviously, with the Chris Collinsworth sucking Tom Brady's D comment. I don't think that's going to fool anybody. But I think, swearing less will be a good thing. But he's just talking, this is the moment Tom Brady's made for. We've seen him do this so many times when he's come back. I want to point something out as a matter of fact in all of Tom Brady's Super Bowls. If there was less than 4 minutes left to go in the game, and he was down more than 4 points, this has happened, but not 7 or 8. So if he had a chance to win, not tie, Because last year in Atlanta, he was able to lead the tying score. And, I'm sure if I look back to some of those early Super Bowls, maybe he scored a touchdown for a tying score there. I don't know. I'd have to look the numbers up. I just honestly don't know. But what I can tell you is every time he's had a chance to win with a touchdown, but a field goal wouldn't tie it, he's had an absolute breakdown. It was twice against the Giants, and he lost both times. And it was once against the Eagles last night, and again, strip sack, fumble, and they lose the game. So I don't know where Chris Collinsworth, again, in my opinion, the worst announcer in all of professional football, is up there like, oh, these are the moments where Tom Brady comes through big. Like, just like it was, against Jacksonville a couple weeks ago. He led a 30-yard touchdown drive to get the win. It's not like he went 95 yards in 90 seconds to get the victory. Like, no, he went 30 yards. Let's not act like he achieved some monumental fiat accompli in that game that cemented his legacy. And now the Patriots have been in eight Super Bowls. That's an impressive feat. You can't take that away from them. It's things have set up well. Things have broke their way, but they've been in 8 Super Bowls, and they're 5-3. And if you look at the bigger trends, where they're only +4 in those 8 Super Bowls, they really, by using the mathematical analysis, they should be 4-4. So they've, when you want to talk about the David Tyree helmet catch or some other lucky plays that have hurt, they've had plays go their way too. So realistically, based on the Pythagorean formula, they should be 4-4. So they've actually out punted their coverage one. And if you kind of really look at what's happened in all their games, really, like the first Super Bowl, you had the tuck rule that came into play. Tom Brady got hurt in the AFC Championship game, which is the only reason they beat the Steelers, in my humble opinion. Then you have Vinatieri kick the field goal to win the game. The second one, you had, I think that's where they played Jake Delhomme, and he turned the ball over like 5 times. But that was probably the one that they had the most control of, because then Jake Delhomme just stormed back kind of in the fourth quarter. Made it kind of closer than it was, but still kind of nerve-wracking. Then you had Spygate game. You had Giants 1, Giants 2. Because after Spygate, they didn't win for a while. And, in all fairness, I think anybody who says the Giants got lucky in those games, the Giants defense outplayed the Patriots defense on both those games, and the Giants deserved to win. And it's not like any of them were high scoring. I think the last 2 Super Bowls have really been so New England was 20, St. Louis 17, New England 32, Carolina 29. Again, that was high scoring. New England 24, Philadelphia 21. That's where Donovan McNabb threw that interception on the 2-minute drive. Then Giants 17, New England 14. Like, they just didn't play well there. Then Giants 21, New England 17. They didn't play well. They didn't deserve to win. Then New England 28, Seattle 24. They win on literally the dumbest play call in the Super Bowl history. And that was strictly based on wanting to make sure that Marshawn Lynch didn't win the Super Bowl MVP by having another rushing touchdown, because they didn't want to keep paying him. They didn't really want him on the roster anymore. They wanted to move on, which looks really bad now, given how bad their running game is, and that they thought they could replace him so much cheaper. That backfired, because it cost you a Super Bowl, and now your team's in disarray on both offense and defense. Then you have last year where Atlanta just literally choked in the biggest choke. And then last night where, again, Philadelphia basically outplayed New England. Philadelphia's offense was better than New England's defense, and Philadelphia was better on special teams, and that's why they won the game. You're better on 2 out of 3 sides, 2 out of 3 phases, you win the football game almost every time. So, I mean, realistically, this could have been a lot different for, the Patriots should be lucky to be 5-3, and that's kind of going to be the crux of my point when I hear people talk about Tom Brady being the GOAT, greatest of all time. Greatest football. I mean, you heard the announcers talk about him being the greatest football player ever. Not even close. Like, he couldn't catch a pass that while he was wide open that was right on his fingertips. Like, the guy's not a complete football player. He's not mobile. If he starts to get hit like he did in the first half or chased around, he becomes highly inaccurate. And then the second half, his line settled down. They started blocking. He made plays. Again, he's not throwing the ball deep anymore. And if I have to hear one more time how he's eluding Father Time and he's just, doing things at 40 that we've never seen before, I'm going to point something out. We've lived through baseball steroid era. We've lived through a football steroid decade before. Is there anybody out there anymore in the sports world who doesn't think if you're seeing something that's unnatural, you just assume it's unnatural? I figure 4 or 5 years after he retires, we'll get a tell-all book about his HGH use and possible steroid use. I'm sure it's coming. Like, you're not doing things that are unnatural naturally. There's a reason why they're called unnatural. But back to the point, like, Tom Brady is one of the least complete quarterbacks in history. Like, he's not the most valuable player on his team ever, and I know he won his third MVP award, but it kind of becomes one of those things where they just feel like they have to give it to him because he's Tom Brady, and it's Tom Brady, and you got to give it to Tom Brady because he's Tom Brady. And it's like, but he's missed a whole season, and they went 11-5. And then last year when he was suspended for 4 games, they went 3-1. So while he was gone, they were 14-6. Peyton Manning missed 1 season with the Colts. They went from 13-3 to 3-13 and had the number 1 overall pick. That's value to your team. You lose your starting quarterback and you're 10 games worse. That's value. Even if you want to say the Patriots might have went 13-3 or 14-2 if Tom Brady played, that's 3 games of value. And again, they went 3-1. So what were they going to go 4-0 with Tom Brady? Okay, so that's another game. 3 games total in a 20-game span versus 10 games in a 16-game span. It's not even close. He's not been the best quarterback other than 1 or 2 years in the league the entire time he's played. Like, almost never, if you could say, I'm taking any quarterback, we're going to put all the quarterbacks in draft, leave the rest of the team the same, even Bill Belichick under True Serum would take Tom Brady number 1 overall. He would have probably taken Peyton Manning number 1 overall and used his smarts, his arm strength, his playmaking, his ability to see the field, read a defense. Then later in his career, he would have taken Aaron Rodgers. Again, his ability to make plays on the move, his ability to make the deep throws. That it's just the reality of it. Like, even if you watched last night, Tom Brady made 1 deep throw. There were a lot of good catches and runs, and there were a lot of easy throws to Gronk. But there was only 1 deep pass, really, that he connected on. It's never been his skill set. It's never been his strength. And I love Joe Montana. He's probably my favorite quarterback to ever play the game of football. Even had jerseys from when he played in Kansas City. I don't think I still have them from when I was much younger. But I had him back then, his Kansas City jersey, and I was a big fan. And it's one of those things where somehow quarterback winning becomes associated with greatness in a way that it doesn't for any other player. I don't know that if you really look at it objectively and think about it, that Joe Montana was the best quarterback in the league any year he played either. Yet somehow these guys become the 2 standards. It's like, conflating somebody's skill with the way they win is a dangerous thing because football has, 22 guys between offense and defense, and not even counting your special teamers, who really all have the ability to affect the outcome individually, but you have to put them together collectively to make them work. It's not just a person in a vacuum who wins a Super Bowl or wins a football game. It's not like a starting pitcher in baseball. It's probably the one spot where one dominant person can go out and win a game, but in no other sport is there anything like that. Maybe goalie in hockey, in the playoffs particularly, you can get a goalie who stands on his head and takes a team to Stanley Cup, I guess. But those are about the 2 examples of it where you don't necessarily have to have all the other pieces. But football particularly is so dominant on every bit and piece fitting together properly. To say that any quarterback really is the best football player, that's just an insult to everything Jerry Rice accomplished in an era when they didn't throw the ball, and they're still not catching up to his numbers. Like, I know the 49ers threw more than other teams, but could you imagine what numbers Jerry Rice could put up in this era of football? I mean, it'd be insane. It's an insult to guys like Walter Payton, who, led the NFL in rushing for years until Emmitt Smith just kept hanging on and hanging on and hanging on to break the record. But could also catch, could also block, and actually could throw the football. It was, he's one of the ones where they'd run a halfback pass quite often because he could actually throw the football. Like, he was a complete football player. This is, again, not even counting all the defensive players, that could be in that discussion. But again, defensive players get overlooked for best player of all time because it's pretty obvious that they, greatest of all time, because they kind of have to fit in that spot. So in football, it's really hard to say somebody's the greatest football player ever, like Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player ever, because what every football player does is so different. There's no way to equate the value of a quarterback to the value of a left tackle. But Tom Brady without Nate Solder is worthless. Like, he has to have a clean pocket. Same way that Peyton Manning needed a clean pocket, but the ways that Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger don't. So it's hard to say who's the greatest of all time, but it's clearly not Tom Brady. He's one Super Bowl loss away from not only being the quarterback with the most Super Bowl wins, but tying Jim Kelly for the quarterback with the most Super Bowl losses. That's got to count for something too. Those losses have to add up every bit as much as the wins. And you're going to get the sycophants and the people who just tune into Barstool Sports and are going to say, well, the defense was the reason we lost. Yeah, well, the defense is the reason you won 3 out of the 5 Super Bowls in the first place. So you got to take the good with the bad on that. If you won 3 because of your defense, losing 1 finally because of it, well, that's the price you pay. That's the cost of business, I guess. But clearly the first 3 Super Bowls were dictated by the New England defense. And even really last year, if that defense doesn't step up and Atlanta keeps moving the ball like they were in the first half and even into the early third quarter, then there's no comeback to be had by Tom Brady in the offense. Like, the defense had to make plays then too. So that was just the reality of the situation. But I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of people just, and Madden didn't help with the GOAT edition of Madden 2018. Like, no. I almost refused to buy Madden this year because it had him on the cover, but I'm 3 years out of date, so I had to buy a new Madden because it was just time. Plus, the story mode was amazing. Absolutely amazing. But don't let me take this away from what the Eagles accomplished last night. They went out there with their backup quarterback, and this is not in the way that, Drew Brees got hurt or Drew Bledsoe got hurt week 3 and Tom Brady played the whole season and won a Super Bowl. This was Nick Foles traded from the Eagles to the Rams, almost out of football because he's begging, because he got cut by Jeff Fisher, because Jeff Fisher is a world-class ruiner of quarterbacks, not named Steve McNair. And, tags on as a backup quarterback last year. I can't remember where. And then this year he goes back to the Eagles and he's a backup and he gets to play, like week 15, 16, 17 off week and then into the playoffs. And he played lights out in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. Games 1 and 2, games 1 particularly against the Falcons, he more managed the game just not to lose it. But against the Vikings, against the Patriots, he balled out. And, of course, he became the first quarterback to ever catch a touchdown pass in the playoffs on a 4th and 1 play just before halftime. I think that deserves some credit for the Eagles' victory as well. I think there gets to be this move to minimize what other teams accomplish against the Patriots. They won a Super Bowl. They played better on that given day. Both times the Giants beat the Patriots, they played better than the Patriots that day. It's not a coincidence. It wasn't one fluke play. It would have been a fluke if the other team win. And as for Tom Brady throwing for 500 yards yesterday, a big whooped. That's what happens when you just don't run the football. Like, they ran for 100 yards, and that was primarily on a few plays. Like, they didn't run the ball much. You pass 50 times, you got to end up with 500 yards because it's the only way you're going to move the ball. It's the only option you have. So don't make that seem like bigger than it was. Oh my God, he threw for don't care. Really don't. If you throw a ball 50 times, you better throw for 500 yards, particularly if that's all you're doing. But again, now the Eagles are going to be in an interesting situation. You got Nick Foles, who just won a Super Bowl, which will mean he'll never have to pay for a drink or a dinner in the city of Philadelphia again. But now he's a very valuable asset, and you're going to have your franchise quarterback, Carson Wentz, coming back from his ACL tear next year. So you're clearly going to turn the keys back over to Carson Wentz. And I know that Nick Foles is affordable as a backup quarterback, but I think there are other people you can get. And I don't know if I'm the Denver Broncos, I'd probably give up a second-round pick and maybe a conditional pick the year after to get me Nick Foles, because obviously if you give him a good enough defense, he can win the Super Bowl. And the Denver defense was down this year, but I think part of it was down just because the offense was so bad, because the quarterback play was horrendous. So if you give him maybe a second rounder this year, or maybe a third rounder and then a conditional next year that's maybe a third, second, or first, depending on how he plays, hey, maybe you get you a quarterback. Then you could take your first pick this year and get you a nice offensive lineman to help bolster your offensive lineman, because you've got good wide receivers. You've got a good running back, or running back by committee at least, that you can put together. The defense still has plenty of playmakers. I think you could be in good shape. I mean, wouldn't be hard to see that happening. If you're the Eagles, you'd be hard-pressed not to take something like that. A second or third this year and a conditional the next year. That depends on how Nick Foles plays. I don't think Nick Foles is ever going to be 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions Nick Foles again, but he's never going to be Rams Nick Foles again either. I feel like he's somewhere in the middle of there, which is a good to slightly better than good quarterback. He's not great. He's never going to be great, but he's going to be good, slightly better than good. And he's good enough to win a Super Bowl. Obviously, we just seen it happen. So if you're the Broncos or another team that feels like you're close, the Buffalo Bills, maybe, who just made the playoffs this year. Or hell, if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, don't you have to at least see if you could pry him away for an affordable rate? I know you're going to say you're all in on Blake Bortles. We've all seen enough of Blake Bortles to know he's not the guy to get you to a Super Bowl. And that defense is every bit as good as the Eagles, if not better, because they have a better back end and could easily get you to a Super Bowl if you put a competent quarterback around him. So I think for Nick Foles is going to have a great moment. Super Bowl MVP, taking his family to Disney World today. And then it's going to be, all right, guys, I'm not coming back as a backup as a Super Bowl MVP. That's just not where I want to be. And I know, there are some saying that the Eagles might hang on to it for a little bit because Carson Wentz isn't healthy. I hope the Eagles organization doesn't do him dirty like that and takes care of him, because I think you owe him that. And there are other guys you can go out and pick up to be a backup and a temporary starter if Carson Wentz isn't ready to go at the beginning of the season. But congratulations to Philadelphia on winning your first Super Bowl. The entire world thanks you for keeping the Patriots from winning number 6, because we would have all never heard the end of it. Trust me, The Ringer and Barstool Sports would have made sure it would have been just nonstop. Patriots are the greatest football team ever. They're the greatest organization ever. Not that they don't do a lot of that now, but it would have been worse today. So we all thank you with a hearty Fly Eagles Fly today. So let me take a quick pause here for a drink. Sorry, that's going to not pause. I accidentally hit the mark button, so let me pause. Sorry, when you're a one-man podcast, you don't really have anybody to fill the downtime when you need to take a drink. And last episode, when I was listening to it while I was editing it, it's a pretty pronounced downtime, so I was going to try and pause this time and make that my habit. So, like I said, I wanted to talk about 3 particular things. Covered as much as I want to talk about the Super Bowl and the Patriots. I could talk, if I had more people to talk to, I think I could just, particularly somebody who's maybe pro-Patriots, I could beat that topic down forever with them. But that's not going to happen. So I'm going to move on to, let's go to the lack of baseball movement this offseason. Because you're starting to see a lot of articles pop up saying, from agents and players talking about possibly boycotting spring training, and that this might be collusion because the owners aren't spending a ton of money, and you've got so many teams cutting payroll, and that's just not the intent of the competitive balance tax and, revenue sharing. And, these teams are going to get this $50 million this year from selling their media rights to Disney, for their streaming and all of this. And they're like, why aren't people spending a ton of money to overpay our free agents? And that's the reality of it, is overpaying free agents. And I think most teams have decided they're done with that. Like, you can't be a 32-year-old Jake Arrieta 3 years removed from your Cy Young, and each of your last 2 years has gotten worse statistically. Last year, you lost speed on your fastball, and then come out asking for a contract that's going to take you to 38 or 39 possibly at $150, $160 million. That's just not what you're worth. And for once, baseball GMs are finally saying, no, we're not going to overpay you because it's going to hamper our long-term flexibility. It's going to hamper our ability to build teams. And I think you're going to start seeing more baseball teams build similar to the way the super teams in the NBA are built, where they're going to pay a few select guys and then try to draft and develop or trade for young, cost-controlled people to fill in around them that can overplay their value. But you're not going to see teams like the Yankees in the late 90s and throughout the decade from 2000 to 2010, basically, or 2012, if you want to go that far, where they just have, Mark Teixeira, Robinson Cano, Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, Jorge Posada, Bernie Williams, Paul O'Neill, Aaron Boone, just every overpaid individual you can go around a diamond, and they were full of them. Just guys overpaid. Andy Pettitte, Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson. They'd bounce in starters, bounce them in. Mike Mussina. They had a few constants. Don't get me wrong, but they still paid really well for them. But in an era where the collective bargaining agreement calls for a progressive luxury tax, where the more you overspend, the bigger the tax becomes, and the more years you're over, then the more punitive that tax becomes as well. You've just hit a perfect situation. And with the fact that next year is going to be probably one of the best free agent classes in 20 years in terms of having guys entering their prime like Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, or even guys who are at the back end of their prime but are just still filthy dominant like Clayton Kershaw. Unfortunately, that's just a significantly better free agent class, and a lot of people are saving their money for that. It's not that Yu Darvish isn't a good pitcher, but it's a bad look when you just got shellacked twice in the World Series and you're coming out looking for frontline starter money. That's just not going to happen. Even a team with some financial flexibility like the Cubs are wisely keeping their flexibility in tow, because sooner or later, Anthony Rizzo's only got a couple more years, then he's going to need a bigger deal than his team-friendly deal. Javi Baez and Addison Russell are starting to get close to arbitration years, and that'll take their salaries up. Chris Bryant's going to need a new deal. Jason Hayward's going to sit there and bloat your books up. Ian Happ, who may just be up, but a couple more years, he's going to start arbitration. Kyle Schwarber's not another year from arbitration. Wilson Contreras is there. Kyle Hendricks is already there and a couple years away from needing a new deal. Jose Quintana's only got a couple more years. So they're not going to throw 6 or 7 years and an over-the-top amount to land a Yu Darvish or bring back a Jake Arrieta. It's just not going to be what they're going to do. If they can get him at the right price, I think that'll be great. But I think some of their plan is, if we have to, we could start with some, a Mike Montgomery in the rotation, or have a couple of guys down on the farm who are close if injuries happen, and then maybe see how the season shakes out and what's available for trades. And of course, when a guy like Chris Archer gets another half a season closer to free agency, his value goes down even more, and maybe an Ian Happ is able to be the piece that swings it, and that's okay. You've still got, but you're not going to see a team like the Cubs load up and add another 6-year, $150 million contract to the last 3 years of the 6-year, $155 million contract they gave to John Lester. It's just not what they're going to do. I think they're waiting, and if they can get a great deal on Yu Darvish, I think that's their preference. I think if not, then they'll look at Jake Arrieta. If they can't get a great deal there, they're going to look at Alex Cobb. It's all kind of, everybody's waiting for the problem is there's too many people in the middle and the back end of the market waiting for the top pieces to fall, the J.D. Martinez's and the Eric Hosmers and the Mike Moustakas, where, I know that's traditionally how that works. The top guys sign first, and then the people behind them base their value off that. But why not, if you're, stop worrying about what you might have left on the table, and you might have signed, more people might have signed. Alex Cobb could probably be a Cub right now if he wanted to be. JD Martinez could be back with the Red Sox if he wanted to be, or with Arizona if he wanted to be for the right price. Lance Lynn could easily be signed by a team right now if he wanted to be. Greg Holland could easily be with a team. He kind of ended up playing Russian roulette and turned down some good deals from what they said. And he's not the only one of these guys at the top of the market. And then all of a sudden, when the music stopped, everybody else grabbed a seat in the closer bullpen, and now he's kind of on the outside looking in, hoping, a team will throw him some money. And then you get agents and that talking about, well, the Marlins and the Pirates, what they're doing is not in the spirit of the competitive balance tax and revenue sharing. It's not. After what we've seen the Giants do, and the Cubs do, and the Astros do with complete teardowns and complete rebuilds, you can't ask teams to try and throw $20 million out and just try and ride the treadmill of mediocrity. You have to sometimes tear down, if you don't have the wherewithal to get past that, get over that hump. The Marlins are never going to be a team that spends $180 million on payroll. They're just not. They're not in that kind of market. They don't have that TV deal. Even when they're good, they don't draw well. It's Miami, for God's sakes, in the summer. Would you rather be at a baseball stadium or out on South Beach? South Beach every day of the week. It was just a terrible place to put a team, and then the city put up a ton of money for a stadium, and guess what? Such is life. But don't blame them for wanting to make themselves competitive over the long haul. And again, ask for this one-time $50 million payment. So you want a team like the A's, who have no revenue coming in beyond that in the future, to commit to 4 years and $80 million to somebody and overspend it by $30 million? No, that's not what Billy Beane's going to do, And again, stop with collusion. All of these front offices now have analytics guys, analytics departments, realistically, they're saying, look, this is what a win's worth. This is how many wins this guy was worth last year. This is what we project him to do over the next several seasons. And this is what you should pay. And they've also got the same analytics guys saying, look, nobody's worth $30 million over 7 years anymore. So a David Price type contract isn't coming down that chute for anybody anymore. At least this year, not for this group. I can't speak for what's going to happen when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado at like 25 and 26 at the free agent market at the peak time for their careers. And if you do sign them for 8, 9, or 10 years, you're still only talking about 34, 35 at the back end of that deal, which is going to be, you'll be overpaying them unless you front load the deal and wean it down the years, but seldom how baseball contracts are set up. Smart teams would do that, particularly if you have the flexibility in the first few years to do so. But that's just not the pattern. But I don't want to hear collusion, and I don't want to hear about, oh my God, it's a slow-moving market. It's a slow-moving market because the guys in the middle and the back choose to make it so. Logan Morrison probably could have a job already if he wanted one, but he's, again, doesn't want to leave money on the table. Well, that's your fault. You see it in other sports where guys in the middle and the back, if there's guys at the top that are holding up, they will jump and take some money from somebody, because at some point money does stop. It's a finite source, and there's only, so maybe 15 teams trying to win the World Series this year. That's actually a pretty good number if you really think about it. It's better than most years for baseball. So I'd be happy with that. And there's always going to be a team that pops up here or there, but ultimately, I think what needs to happen is baseball needs to sit down for the next collective bargaining agreement and maybe find a way to maybe end arbitration and agree to a structured, a rookie scale essentially for the first 4 years of a player's contract, and a similar style, maybe even a more punitive luxury tax, and then in exchange offer the players free agency after 4 years, so they're coming out when they're younger. Change service time rules to, if you play more than 51% of your team's games, that counts as a full season accrued. So if you play in 82 games, you've earned a season, so you don't get this weird, we're going to keep a guy in the minors for 2 weeks so we get an extra year of team control, or even worse, when you've seen teams keep them down there for 7 or 8 years, so they could push them from Super 2 to wait till year 3 to get to arbitration. So hey, you lose arbitration, the owners get a fixed structure for the first 4 years. In exchange, you get free agency sooner, and we're going to put a salary floor in place for a more punitive luxury tax that maybe is tied, instead of just creating numbers out of thin air and making them up, that is tied to a percentage of the revenues, a percentage of total baseball revenues divided by 30. Might be a smart plan. But again, you can't be surprised when guys are 31 and 32 hitting free agency that they don't want to hand out 7 or 8 year deals anymore. Everybody saw the end of Alex Rodriguez's deal, the end of Jason Giambi's, the end of Mark Teixeira's, the end of Mike Hampton's deal, Denny Nagel blow up in everybody's face. The list could go on and on forever. And it's just, I think it's finally that baseball economics and real economics have crossed paths, and they're like, we're done. We're not going to waste any time anymore overpaying guys at 38, 39, 40, hoping to win a championship, whether 31, 32, 33, and get there. It doesn't make sense. We're not trading 3 better years now for 3 terrible years later, and hoping that the couple mil years of that deal are average, so we don't lose out on the deal. But in reality, that's what's happened. Is it's not collusion. It's not anything else other than a collective bargaining agreement that doesn't set up well just the wrong free agent class in front of the right free agent class. So again, the Dodgers are trying to remain flexible. The Yankees are trying to remain flexible. The Red Sox are trying to remain flexible. Cubs are trying to remain flexible for next year. All of these teams want to be in the Manny Machado sweepstakes, the Bryce Harper sweepstakes, the potential Clayton Kershaw sweepstakes. That's what they're putting themselves up for. They don't want to trade maybe one guy who can be a 2 or 3 starter for a couple of years, and then at the end of the deal be a 4 or 5 if we're lucky starter, or maybe a bullpen arm guy for in exchange for not being able to have the money to go for Bryce Harper or Manny Machado, who, if you do give him 8 years, will be 33, 34 at the end of the deal. Like, that's where we're at. So I'm going to transition over to the Bulls rebuild. And once again, I'm going to hit a quick pause and take a drink to freshen up for the home stretch here. All right. So I'm back now. And like I said, I want to talk about the Bulls rebuild. And, you'll hear from sports writers, and you hear on sports radio all the time that, it was a good thing for the Bulls to finally commit to a rebuild and trade Jimmy Butler and now trade Nikola Mirotic. And really commit to a direction, because they were in that treadmill of mediocrity. And that sounds really great, but they kind of got in that treadmill of mediocrity after they traded Derrick Rose and then panicked. They didn't trust that Nikola Mirotic was going to develop if they gave him consistent time and touches. They didn't trust that Jaren Grant could be serviceable, or that they could find another point guard. And they, didn't trust that a core of, and they never gave it a chance. This is really the ultimate issue. So they never gave a chance for a core of Jimmy Butler, Nikola Mirotic, Brook Lopez. They had Justin Holiday at the time, who's back and a serviceable backup wing. And another shooter or two around those guys would have been good. So they panicked and they brought in Rajon Rondo. And then they somehow signed Dwayne Wade. And they ran into spacing problems. That's what they ran into. And they kept Taj Gibson for another season instead of trading him off. He's a guy you could have traded for another wing, a starting caliber wing possibly, and then some better spacing. But instead they just panicked and tried to sign a bunch of names and ended up in the 8th seed of the playoffs and getting bounced out in the first round again in their post-Derrick Rose era. And it just didn't go well. But then, lo and behold, Jimmy Butler was still all NBA player last year. Nikola Mirotic this year, finally given consistent minutes and consistent touches, is suddenly, an 18-8 guy in 22, 23 minutes, guy who's averaging 24 and 12 in his per 36s, and would have been a perfect space player next to a Jimmy Butler, but they didn't give it a chance to see. And they had two guys who could have been, difference makers entering their primes of their career. And instead they panicked and traded Jimmy Butler and gave up a first-round pick to get a first-round pick back with him, with two guys, one who was coming off a torn ACL. So now he's careening towards free agency this year, unrestricted, but still free agency. And he's not going to get to play enough consistent minutes in back-to-back games to see what you really have in him. And Chris Dunn, who's played okay at times this year, but at times has not played well. And a rookie. But then you gave up your own pick in that deal, your own first-rounder, which doesn't make sense for a rebuilding team. And then you have the Nikola Mirotic trade, where you have an actual piece that somebody should want, and you take back 3 years of Omar Sheik, who you didn't keep years ago and has bounced around and has become worse. Some salary filler to make the salaries match, both of which expire. One you've already waived, one that'll expire at the end of the year, and a first-round pick, but you had to send back the second-round pick of the Pelicans that you acquired this offseason for taking one of their salary dumps. Again, which you shouldn't have had to do. Like, it just gets to be perplexing to me why the Bulls keep giving up these picks as parts of trades, and we're not even going to get into the Taj Gibson and Doug McDermott and a second-round pick for a point guard who's not seen the floor this year, and you picked up his fourth-year option. And I'm trying to think of his name, and it's not coming to me. But it's just time and time again, whether it's free agent signings or trades or whatever has happened, time and time and time again, the GarPax front office has proven that they have no plan, they have no vision, and there is sure as shit no way for me to trust them in a rebuilding process. I don't trust the process with them. They don't see it. They don't have a plan. They don't, They still went out and signed Justin Holiday this year. They brought back Nikola Mirotic on a 1 year, $12.5 million deal with an option for another $12.5 instead of just having him sign the restricted tag for $7.5 million. And I know some of that had to do with no trade things, and they were hoping to trade him, but you way overpaid him, and now you had to take back a bad contract. You overpaid Feliciano. You gave him 4 years, $32 million on the first day of free agency, afraid that, oh my God, somebody might outbid you for him. Let them have him. He's terrible. He's been in the G League / D League all year, basically, and he doesn't see the court. But at this point, it's time to probably trade Jaren Grant and see if you can get anything for him. Maybe in a package with Brook Lopez, so you have to play some combination of Feliciano and Ashik in there, along with Bobby Portis playing some, which some reason you decide to keep him over Mirotic, even though he's been by far the more inconsistent player with the lack of three-point stroke, the inability to rebound most nights. You kept the poor man's Nikola Mirotic, and Mirotic has gone into New Orleans, played great so far. I started this offseason before they even traded Jimmy Butler with hashtagging almost everything Bulls related that I'd tweet and send out hashtag fire GarPax. And it's, I still believe that. I think it's time for the Bulls to move on. This is the group that actually made the smart decision and traded Luol Deng a little before he aged out, which was a smart thing. Gave up on, didn't overpay Joakim Noah before he turned the corner and jumped the shark on being a useful NBA player. But then they did things like when they traded Luol Deng for a first-round pick, but it had top 10 protection, lottery protection, top 10. And then after 4 years, it conveys to 2 seconds. They actually did the same thing with this Pelicans pick. I mean, granted, it's top 5 this year. They should be out of the top 5. Top 3 or something in the next couple of years. Then it turns into 2 second-rounders. Stop doing that. Like, that's terrible GMing. Danny Ainge not only gets multiple first-round picks and pick swaps when he makes a deal to get rid of his quality veterans. Somehow the Bulls make a deal where instead of it just losing protection and becoming an unprotected pick for 1 year, They just, we'll take 2 seconds instead. Then they turn around and sell the second round pick for $3.5 million and trade a semi-useful young player away to a championship caliber team. Well, because that'll give us goodwill sometime later on and allow us to take back a salary dump or buy a draft pick when we need one. And in all fairness, the Bulls have bought picks in the past. So it's not one of those things where Reinsdorf won't do it when they ask, but when you're in the middle of a rebuild, you don't sell picks. You acquire as many young players as you can. So, their mentality was, well, we were looking for wing players. All the wings we had scouted were gone. So we didn't have anybody to take. How do you draft at like 40-something and not have a player to take? Or how did you get there? Like, how fatally flawed is your front office that you can reach that spot? Like, wasn't there somebody in Europe on the board still that you could have drafted and stashed? And said, okay, we'll sit on this guy for a couple of years. If he develops, great. We'll bring him over. If he doesn't, well, it was a pick we didn't take. No big deal. No harm, no foul. But instead, you ship pick for $3.5 million to the world champions. Yeah, that's great team building. Don't acquire another young asset. Just acquire cash. And now you have the lowest payroll in all of basketball, and you're looking to move more pieces. So what's the plan? What's the vision? There's, are you going to overpay Zach LaVine this year and hope he lives up to it? Or are you going to hope that nobody makes him an offer and get another year on the restriction tag? Or are you going to wait till somebody offers him too much money and match and then end up in losing all your flexibility because you have a bunch of money to Sheik and Feliciano and you've got a couple high draft picks and probably another one. So suddenly all your cap space is gone too. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch. But again, there's not. The best free agent signing of the entire Garpax era is Carlos Boozer. If that's the best free agent signing you've got, I don't trust you with cap space. I just don't. And when that's the case, I think it's clear what needs to happen. And I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan when it comes to football. I will tell you that I understand the value of continuity in both coaching staff and front office and what they bring when you have a consistent vision for what you're looking to build. And I don't mind if Fred Hoiberg stays. I hope he does. But give me a GM who can build, draft players, acquire talent, make trades, do things right. I don't know. There's this guy available who has done something similar recently, and his name's Sam Hinkie. Can't we all learn to trust the process and bring Sam Hinkie into another rebuilding team? Who knows if he's the guy for a team once they're starting to mature and take the steps towards contention. We didn't get to see that because the 76ers bowed to league pressure and replaced him with Colangelo, which sucks. Because guess what? All these guys he drafted to build the core are suddenly really pretty good, and they're competing for the playoffs. And the cap space they had is right there. And again, I don't know if he'd have panicked and traded away an extra first-round pick to move up 2 spots for a point guard the way Colangelo did, and now it's blowing up in his face. It's like, I don't think Sam Hinkie makes that move. I think he sits still at third and takes Markelle Fultz if he falls or Lonzo Ball if he falls. Now, granted, Fultz was the better fit, because I still think the Celtics would have taken Jason Tatum number 1 overall. I don't think they were taking Markelle Fultz, but Colangelo got played. Like, Colangelo has his entire career. So if that's what's going to happen once he's gone, maybe it's time to give Sam Hinkie a team with some money and some assets already and see if he can make some deals to acquire more assets and get more young players, because the Bulls don't have a single franchise cornerstone right now. That's the problem. They're actually getting into a position where they might get right back to that 6th, 7th, 8th seed contention spot if Chris Dunn continues to develop and Zach LaVine gets healthy and Lauri Markkanen develops and they somehow fall out of the top 3 or 4 of this year's draft. They might get just good enough to be playoff competitive again without high ceiling guys again to push them over the top, and no picks coming down the line that aren't theirs, or if they get in that pattern again. It's like, this is who Garpax is. They've had almost a decade now, really, to get this figured out, and they have it. Like, they're not the guys to do it. They're just not. And again, I don't know if it's one or the other that's the bigger problem. My guess is that Gar Forman's the bigger problem because he thinks he's smarter than he is. But it's hard to tell. You can't separate one from the other. So I think you have to extricate both and start from scratch. Bring in Sam Hinkie as your president of basketball operations. Let him bring in a GM he likes if he needs one, and go build yourself a winner. So I look forward to these next couple of days as the trade deadline for the NBA approaches, and seeing if they can at least get back a real pick and gain an additional draft pick when they trade Robin Lopez, not Brooke Lopez, Jesus, and Jaren Grant. But they're running out of teams to trade him to, because one of the best would have been the Boston Celtics, who could have used a backup point guard like Jaren Grant, particularly with them trying to trade Marcus Smart. And they could use the rebounding and interior presence of Robin Lopez, but they went out and signed Greg Monroe for $5 million. And now if they want to trade for somebody like Jaren Grant, they'll give up their own first-round pick, probably. That's it. So something that's going to fall around 28, 29, 30. I feel like that's kind of not... Don't get me wrong, they would have got you Kyle Kuzma this year with their pick, but it still wasn't getting you over the hump. So, I'm going to say and end this podcast on hashtag fire Garpax, hashtag trust the process, hashtag bring me Sam Hinkie. So thank you for tuning in to episode number 2 of the Don't Worry, Nobody's Listening podcast. And once again, I was Jason Manicki-Critchlow, your host. Add me on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at JSONBANICKI. And again, subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your neighbors, your coworkers. Be obnoxious about it for me. I'd love to have listeners, period. Any of them. But again, you'll find us on iTunes, the Podbean app, Castbox, YouTube, my Twitter feed. I think I'm on Google Play Music and a couple others. But, like I said, Spotify will be coming. TuneIn Radio will be coming. We'll keep going farther and farther out and get this thing growing and out to the masses. So thank you guys very much, and peace out.